right. Well, we're pleased to welcome our first interview on the podcast.
Yeah, pretty crazy. We've been talking about this forever. You guys might know him from his work between the benches on SWX for some Chiefs games in the past, and a former Spokane Chief from the inaugural season. Welcome, Dan Holden.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thank
Always
you for doing this.
interesting to do new forms of media here.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. Everybody does this, and everybody drinks liquid death when they're doing podcasts these days too. So.
Yeah, he's not wrong. I'm drinking it too.
Hopefully, that's not a precursor.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. So, what are you up to these days, Dan? Now that golf season's winding down.
Right now, I'm kind of recently retired from corporate America. Like I said, I spent around 30 years in the tech world after my hockey days, and basically was working for companies that were selling enterprise networking equipment, switches, routers, firewalls, collaboration tools, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Also acquired some real estate along the way. So right now I'm babysitting that, and that's kind of my thing right now. Also still play a couple of times a week with some of the guys that I grew up with, and there's still some ex-Chiefs in town, like Justin Hawking was out the other night.
Nice.
Dimitri Leonov is still around. Shane Maitland is still around. So some of those guys, from bygone years are still in the mix and like to play old man's hockey. It's very civil. If somebody runs into somebody, it's an accident.
That's fun.
And we stick around, have a couple of beers, and catch up with each other. So it's great that way, and it's really good to see the guys that kind of came here as outsiders. They're kind of the insiders right now.
Right. Right. That's, I always knew a lot of those Chiefs came back to the area, but some of those guys I didn't know were back in here. I mean, I know some of the guys later in Chiefs years came back a little bit here and there. I see, even in the summertime, I see Kitchton at coming down river every once in a while and play golf and guys like that too. But
yeah, and I know that I saw Kitchton at an event at Bobby Brett's house, and then Anthony Berdero was there as well. He had married a local girl here in Spokane, so there's lots of ties that are here. I think Derek Schutz is still around town as well.
really,
Yeah, so there's a lot of guys that I think are still in the mix these days that are they just got here and they ended up staying here.
mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of people that end up coming to Spokane to play hockey, there's a lot of them that just end up settling down, and
Mm-hmm.
there's usually a girl involved, or there's usually a job involved. And those types of things tend to be the two that make a guy stay. And my father, when he got down here, he played for the old Jets and Flyers in the late
Mm-hmm.
60s, early 70s. And the reason he got down here is they had called him and they said, "Hey, if you come down here and play for us, we'll pay for your law school at Gonzaga University." So
Really,
that was a pretty
wow,
easy decision. And Spokane's senior team at the time was really, it was a very well-respected program.
mm-hmm.
They were able to put 5,000 people a night in the building on Saturday nights,
Mm-hmm.
back in the old Boone Street barn. And they were able to, pay players to come down here to, most of them went to school. Ken Gustafson was a great
Mm-hmm.
example of that back in the day. He would, he ended up getting his school paid for at Eastern, had a teaching degree, and stayed here for a long, long time. But, Dave Cox, the White Crothers, George Flotty, Larry Planio, all of those guys, and a bunch more were all in that pile of, people that migrated down here, and, all a bunch of, far-flung Canadians.
Yeah, I've talked to Dwight quite a bit when he marshaled at the golf course last year about that stuff too, and he talked about the same thing. Them saying, "Hey, you come play for us. We're going to do this for you." Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great tool for Spokane to be able to grab some really top end players in their senior program. it was a great carrot to be able to dangle in front of people, and they're going, well,
Mhm.
do I want to go here? Do I want to go, work in some mining town, in Canada and do the same thing where my options might be limited?
Right. Right. Do you, is that what got you into hockey? Was your dad playing here and stuff too? You just kind of grew up in the game?
Oh God, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It was, my dad was going to Gonzaga's law school. It was a night only program. So he would practice kind of during the day by himself because everybody else had jobs, and the team would practice from 5:30 to 6:30 or 7 or whatever it was.
Mhm.
So he would be out there doing drills by himself, or maybe there'd be a couple of guys that were on the injured reserve that he could skate with. But that was kind of my daycare when I was a kid. And it was a lot of the other, guys' kids' daycare as well. So like we used to have awesome ball hockey games in the concourses of the old Boone Street Barns.
Mhm.
Was awesome. It was such a great place to grow up. And you also had, when the circus came to town, or, wrestling, or, Elvis
Right.
came to town back in the day, all of that stuff, the rodeo. I mean, the place smelled like horse shit for 2 weeks after, but it was still a very fond experience. You'd walk in there and there'd be a bunch of bulls and horses and stuff like that all over the place, and those guys were getting dressed and they'd go practice up at the Eagles or something like that. But that was, those were my fondest childhood memories. And as kids, we got to go to pretty much everything. And
Mhm.
it was the Harlem Globetrotters, it was concerts, it was, it was all kinds of fun stuff that got going there. And it was an awesome childhood experience.
That's awesome. That was a great arena. I got to be in there quite a few times too. I didn't get to play basketball in there because the new one was built when I was in high school. But I remember sitting in the horseshoe watching the Flyers, the stage on the other end where the scoreboard is now,
Yeah.
and stuff too. The only name I can remember from the old Flyers days, right before the Chiefs started up, was Don Dirk. That's the only name I can remember, just because he was a tough guy.
Don Dirk was brought to Spokane for a reason.
And that reason only. I believe that.
His nickname was Dirty. So
that says enough.
And I think that he was one of those guys that had earned that. Very nice, cordial man off the ice. Knew what his job was on the ice, and the two shall never meet. So, very highly popular guy when he was in Spokane. And Spokane has always had I think a soft spot for the tough guys that have come into the city. And it's everybody from Dirk and Pilati and Palanio to you get Vakota and Toporowski and England, and just a handful more that I'm missing. But there was always been a group of people in the fan base at Spokane that just say, we love those guys, and we're gonna support them all the way.
Yeah,
and
they did.
Still that way too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I kind of want to start in the middle of your career a little bit, and then kind of backtrack a little bit too. So I'm looking at some of these guys because I remember a lot of these names too from the season you played with. How did you end up with the Chiefs? Were you drafted or?
No, I was a complete accident. I had played for the University of Calgary as a 19-year-old, and I wasn't on scholarship, and I planned on going back to Penticton, where I played earlier in my career, and try and get a scholarship. So I had jacked up my shoulder. I'd separated my shoulder early in that year, and I'd come back home to rehab. And my dad knew Ernie Gare, Mark Pezin, and Jeff Bandura, who happened to be the coaching staff. He played with Bandura, or he had played with Ernie Gare. He had played with Mark Pezin, and he had coached Jeff Bandura. So they were all very familiar, and they ran into each other one night. I think they were having a beer, and they said, "Hey, what's your kid doing these days?" And he said, "Well, he's banged up his shoulder, and we're not really sure right now. So I ended up having a AC separation in my shoulder.
Mhm.
They said, hey, if you want to send him out to skate with us to get some work in before he goes back, please do. So I did, and I walked into the Chiefs room and dropped my gear on the floor. And the Chiefs, I think, were 1-8 at the time,
Mhm.
and every day somebody had walked in that door with a new bag of equipment and sticks and dropped them on the floor. So they're looking at me going, who's this guy?
Who's this guy? Yeah.
So we don't really know, is somebody else getting traded today, or, what's going on? So I had just said, hey, I'm just here on a rehab thing. And Mick Bakota was the first guy to get up and go, hey, who are you? And, I kind of stood in front of the room and said, hey, here's what I am. And I had also known the staff there. So Carl Cirillo and a guy named John Hitman Hearn was around there at the time. So I kind of had a few friendly faces there. So I started working out with them. And at the end of the stint, they had said, we would like to keep you if you're, if you are so inclined. And they said, we'll make it with your while, we'll pay for some school for you and get that done. So it would have been the equivalent of me having a scholarship for the things that they took care of. So
Nice.
I ended up, and who doesn't want to play in their hometown? I mean,
Exactly.
I was kind of sitting there going, well, this is a great deal for me as well. Like I get school paid for, I make a little bit of money, I get to play in my hometown. This is awesome. So
Yeah.
off we go. And that's kind of how I got into Spokane. And it was weird because Spokane had moved the franchise, or basically Kelowna had moved the franchise. The Kelowna Wings had moved the franchise to Spokane, and we ended up being, a team that was not very good at the front end of the year, but ended up probably a little bit more than 50-50. I think, 500 team at the end of it, which was good for us. So I think team ended up having somewhere around 10 NHL draft picks on that team. So we had a good amount of talent. We had some bad injuries along the way to, guys like Brent Gilchrist, who ended up, had a great career in the show. Ended up winning a cup with Detroit. Bakota had a great career as well. Darcy Wakala. And so we ended up having some of those guys get banged up along the way. And, everybody's banged up, but we ended up, having a pretty good year that year. I wouldn't have traded it for the world. And being able to play in front of your hometown crowd was awesome.
It's got to be.
And looking at like the amount of players that they had on that team, I mean, they had 36 skaters on that team. So what you were saying at the beginning is definitely true, because they, the rough record and different guys coming in every day and stuff too. I could tell that they were looking just for any little spark to kind of get going.
Yeah, Elliot, it was pretty weird at the front end of that. And I was kind of an outside observer where I really wasn't part of the team. I was just trying to, make the practices better and, things like that. But man, there was a ton of trades going on. And, as you say, use 36 guys that end up playing for that team, and you're sitting there going, that's a big number. That's almost, 2 teams worth of players.
Yeah.
And that was very accurate. Things had settled down a little bit, as we got into it. I think that most teams in the Western Hockey League on the front
Connection issues.
Do we lose him?
You have a bunch of guys that are able to figure out what's going on, what's not going on, where they're going to play that year. And I think that we did have a little bit of that, but there was a lot of, volatility on the front end of that. Then we settled it down. It was a much better situation, 2 months in.
Yeah, they're trying to get their feet wet too, obviously, with the franchise being new here in Spokane and everything too.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I'm just looking at some of these guys. I remember a lot. Tony Horacek. I remember that guy's name.
Yeah.
Played with you. I remember Darcy Wakalaka, Darcy Lowen. He was young. I remember him too. I remember him very well.
Yeah. So back in those days, I mean, we had 3 or 4 or 5 guys that were tough as nails, and everybody else did in the league as
Mm-hmm.
well. That was just kind of the way things were in, the mid '80s. We had Vakota Horacek, we had, Berger was tough, Rocky
Yep.
Dundas was tough. We ended up having, Delcourt was our captain. He was tough as well. We had Ian Herbers for a while. We had Scott Jordan. Like everybody in the lineup was, able to take care of things. But so did everybody else in the league. I
Yeah.
mean, Kamloops had, Craig Berube and, Rudy Postcheck, and, Seattle had Jamie Hushcroft and Brett Severin. I think Manson and Baumgartner were defensive pairing, and Prince Albert.
Oh wow.
That was super fun.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think you just look down the lineups of the guys that were in the league at that time, and it was just a different game. The mentality of, if you can't beat them in the rink or beat them in the alley, you can't beat them in the rink.
Mm-hmm.
That thought prevailed throughout the league, and there were, like, New West was in the league at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, Ewan was in that, Dean Ewan or
Yep.
Todd Ewan in that pile, and then they had this guy who was like a 6'7", knuckle dragger that was, terrorizing the league. So there was a lot to be wary of in the league at that point. And I think that a lot of those guys were kind of single purpose type players, where I think that there's still an intimidation factor in the game right now, where you have to have some sluggers out there,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to have a minimum skill level, to compete in the league. And if you don't have that, then I think you're probably useless.
Yeah. No, I agree. I remember some of the big games, big rivalries against New Westminster, and remember when Victoria got the team too, them too, and remember when Dean Ewan played. I remember a big brawl with us and them one time, and he just pummeled the guy, and he's on the ice, and the linesmen aren't breaking it up, and the guy's just bleeding all over, and he's got the guy, and he's like looking at the referee like, "Can you please stop me? Because I'm not going to stop." I remember that very well.
Yeah, I think that the component for the leagues have changed dramatically from the physical intimidating component to, the skill set of,
Mm-hmm.
speed. The speed and skill right now, I think, trumps everything in the vast majority of the sports right now.
Yeah.
And it's not just hockey. I think hockey has, some interesting variables that some of the other places don't, or other sports don't. But skill and speed right now, if you have those two things and are able to process the game at a pretty reasonable manner, you're going to be a good player in that league.
Yeah. Is that the biggest change you see? Is just the speed and skill?
Yeah, I do. I think that the speed and the skill, and I think that people talk about hockey IQ
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to slow down the game. I mean, when you first come into a new league that's, a step above where you were at, like, it feels like you're in a blender. It feels like that thing is spinning so fast and so hard, and it's like it's hard to make plays in those types of
Mm-hmm.
situations. But as you kind of get acclimated to that league, they have, they call it a thing that they say that the game slows down a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it doesn't slow down. It just means that you're getting better to better accommodations to it is basically what's happening. So, and I think that that's probably true for just about every sport. When you climb the notch a little bit in the league stuff, and then you go, okay, this is going pretty fast, and then maybe a month or two after you've been there, you kind of go, okay, this is like way more comfortable than it used to be.
You kind
And
of get used to
some
it.
guys get that sooner too, and some guys pick it up faster, and some guys have it when they get here. Guys like a Berkeley Catton, for instance.
Sure.
Yeah. And then those guys
Sure.
get invited to an NHL camp to start the year, and you can tell when they come back from going to a training camp, this league has got to feel very slow to them after a week or so up there too.
Yeah, and I think that that's bang on. I think that the guys, like Canton and Sage, who have been to these, there was a handful of the Chief guys that ended up going there. Those guys get thrown into that pile, and they're probably going like, "Oh man, this is
Yeah.
spinning pretty fast right
Now I'm
now."
in the blender. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then they come back and you have guys that have played in the show for, 10 or 15 years that's just the standard of play.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you come back to Spokane and there might be a 15 or 16-year-old out there, at practice or in a game. And that is way different than some guy that's been in the show for, 10 or 15 years. Completely different specimens as far as, players and, physical stature, things like that. I think that, you look at the Chiefs lineup this year versus, 2 and 3 years ago, they have a very much more mature group. And a lot of that has to do with, some of the, 15 and 16-year-olds that were thrown into the lineup, a couple of years ago, and they're 18 and they have taken a ton of reps in this league. And I think that will bear fruit for the Chiefs this year.
Yeah, I agree. And youth again this year coming in that way to bear fruit another 2 years down the road too.
Yeah. And I think, and you look, the junior hockey situation is pretty cyclical. I think that you have the draft that I think works very well. You look at, teams like Kamloops and Seattle who loaded up, last year and the year before to try and make, pretty deep playoff runs. And they should have, because they had fantastic personnel. And sometimes, you're going to be able to pull that off and sometimes you aren't. But I think that, those teams were very well, advised to go take a crack at it.
Mm-hmm.
And, they traded a lot of, draft picks for some high-end guys that were proven in the league to go take a crack at it. So I think that you have, the back end of that, sometimes isn't so pretty. I know that the Chiefs had emptied some of the cupboards, back in the day where they had traded, Toporowski to Kamloops and, a few others that they got some draft picks out of it. It made sense at the time. They probably weren't going to be able to be that team that made a run, and they decided to stockpile. And now you look at those things, and it's probably the catalyst that has spurred the bid for the Memorial Cup. I think that Everett is, they think that they're going to be good. And then you have some teams in the East that, are going to be good as well. And, they want to crack at it too. Yeah. So, I think that, a team like Medicine Hat is very well positioned to go do something like that. So
we'll see what happens for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Like going back with like the trade talks from a couple of years ago. And I'm looking at this now, November 10th, 2022, when we traded Mason Beaupit to Winnipeg for Dawson Cowan and 3 draft picks. And it's like, some of those draft picks were 2023, 2024 guys that are like on the roster now. And then Dawson Cowan's obviously a great goaltender as it is. So like, and he's just getting better with age. We got him when he was young. So yeah, absolutely. It's a rebuilding cycle.
And I think Spokane too. I mean, while we're on the goaltending aspect of it too, you look at Spokane this year, they end up having 2 pretty solid goaltenders, and you knew one was going to go.
Yeah.
And Spokane was quite comfortable with that because they knew they had a younger guy, Essler in the background that, maybe he plays 25% of the games, 30% of the games this year, and they get him into a position where he's comfortable with the league and is a guy that can fill the shoes as the goaltenders graduate,
Right.
into the NHL, or maybe the minors, or wherever they're going to be. So I think that Spokane's brain trust, Brett, Matt Bardsley, Mark Miles are in pretty good shape that way. I think that they've made some good moves along the way, and it'd be awesome to have the Memorial Cup back in Spokane.
Yes, it would.
It'd be
Wouldn't that
cool.
be great? I was way too young to remember the last Memorial Cup. I was a year old the last time the Memorial Cup was here, so I would love to experience that.
Yeah. No, it was fun. I mean, there were some unbelievably talented, skilled teams, with players that you never get to see live. And I think that you end up seeing those guys playing in the NHL a couple of years later, and you kind of go, yeah, I saw those guys play in Spokane.
Hmm.
It was, yeah, and they deserve to be there.
Yeah,
See,
we
we
do that
even do
every.
that now. Yeah.
Yeah, he and I about 2 or 3 times a year will go. Can you believe we saw so and so play on this team when they came to play in Spokane and stuff? And now look what they're doing in the NHL. We talk about that all the time. We've seen so many good players come through this league.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, um, the kid in Everett, Landon DuPont, the guy that has exceptional status, there are
Mm-hmm.
very few, 15-year-olds that have been allocated that status throughout not only the Western Hockey League, but the Ontario Hockey League and Quebec Major Junior League. I mean, that is pretty heady stuff for a 15-year-old to play,
Yeah,
at this level.
yeah,
It is, you have to be physically mature, mentally mature, and there's a lot of other, I think, soft skills that are involved in that to be able to play at that level. And that kid obviously has them. I
yeah.
mean, you go back and look at all of the exceptions for 15-year-olds,
They
and you're
turned
going to
out pretty
see
good.
like Gretzky and
Yeah,
Lindros. And I
Hmm.
mean, it's a really,
yeah,
really fine list.
yeah.
So,
So I
so
want to go back to your early hockey days back in 82, 83 when you played in Penticton. You played with a kid from Belleville that people might know about, played in the NHL.
yeah, like Penticton was um, probably the most, I don't know, defining year. The year before I was a senior at Mead High School, or I would have been a senior at Mead High School, and I left to go try out for Penticton.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I had a decent opportunity to make that team. Penticton the year before had went, I think, to the Western Canadian, championship. Like, they were good. They were loaded. Like, Ray Ferraro had played for that team. They had a couple of guys that went to the NHL as well. Bruno Campisi, an ex-Spokane guy, or ex-Spokane, Jet guy, had
Mm-hmm.
played there as well and ended up in Portland as well. But long story short, their team the year before I got there, anybody who wanted a Division I scholarship got a Division I scholarship. They were that good.
Wow.
And some of the other guys that didn't take a scholarship ended up going, to the Western Hockey League.
Mm-hmm.
So they graduated basically everybody but three players. So Penticton ends up having 220 guys show up at camp. I showed up and I went,
Wow.
holy shit. Like, this is like, there's a lot going on here. So among those players was Brett Hull. And I looked at him, and he's 5'11", 6 feet tall, and he's at that point, he's probably 240 pounds. And it just, like, terrible shape. I was kind of going, are you kidding me? So I go, what's he doing here? So Penticton wanted this kid named Ali Cook, and Ali Cook played for the Burnaby Winter Club. Ali's like 6'4", 210-pound guy that was just like, could skate like the wind, handle the puck. So Ali calls Penticton and he says, hey, I got my buddy Brett Hull. He wants to come to camp. can I bring him with me? And they go, like, as in Bobby Hull's son, Brett Hull? And they said, yeah, go ahead, bring him. So here comes Hull, and we start doing the off ice training. And I mean, it's all pretty intensive stuff. And I'd been working out all summer, so I was in pretty good shape. And I looked at Hull and like, Hull looks like he's going to have a heart attack over there. So we continue to the on ice stuff. And I mean, he's not a well conditioned athlete. So we start going through some drills and things like that. And he's just average. And then we start scrimmaging. And then he starts shooting a puck. And then everybody kind of went, oh, now I know why he's here. He had the ability to score from anywhere inside the blue line, wrist shot, slap shot. I mean, you name it. So he ended up having they gave him some rope there. We go to the, bunkhouse where everybody was being housed. And, my name's Holden, his name's Hull. So he's on top bunk. And the top bunk is like fur like this. And I'm going, like, if he comes down on me, like
You're
I'm
dead.
on the IR for at least 2 months. At least 2 months. So we get to the games, the intra-squad games, and Holly starts shooting a puck, and like he's burying stuff from, like, he's doing things that nobody else there is doing. And it's a pure talent thing. It's not because he's in better shape than anybody. It's just because he has an ability that nobody else does. So he ends up being
We're frozen.
Uh-oh.
they end up
There we
keeping him
go.
around. And the year after that, he scored 110.
Wow.
So
God.
he just went crazy. Calgary drafts him. He ended up getting a scholarship to Minnesota Duluth, and then Calgary ended up trading him for some reason to St. Louis, where he spent the vast majority of his career. So he awesome teammate. We carpooled to a place called Summerland, which was 10, 12 miles out of town to go to school every day. So we would jump in Holly's Pinto wood flavored wagon. The wagons that had like the wood paneling on the side of them that looked like Griswold's. Yeah.
Nice.
So we would all pile into that, and off we would go to school and come back.
That's funny.
And like we're all, 17, 18 years old, and it was just nobody knew who was gonna, end up where, and everybody was, everybody's friend. It was just an awesome time to be playing hockey in British Columbia at that point. So
nice.
But yeah,
That's awesome.
You never know who the next guy would be to be, I guess the highest scoring American player in, the
Pretty
NHL.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It really is. So Paul was probably the best, talented skill guy that I ever played with or against. When I was playing for the Chiefs, we ended up having Dwayne Hutton come to our group from Canadian Olympic team. And Hutton knew most of those guys because he'd played with the Wings in Kelowna the year before.
Mm-hmm.
But Hutton was he was in that category too. I think he was a 4th round guy to Washington, I think. But Hutz was no filter, I guess. They say all gas, no brakes.
Yeah.
So Hutz ends up showing up in Spokane. Coach had known him, a bunch of guys know him, so they threw him in the lineup. Somebody throws him a pass up the middle. It gets kind of deflected. The guy that is the pass is intended to or is passing to Hutton. It's wobbling along. Hutton kicks the puck up over his head. It lands, over his shoulder on his skate. He beats the D guy one-on-one and then made the goaltender look like he'd never played hockey before.
Wow.
And I'm sitting on the bench and I'm going, I'm so glad that guy's on my team right now. But yeah, Hutz was just a very colorful guy. Had he got drafted by Washington. He was sitting at camp one day, and apparently Buttons, who was their director of player personnel, had come in and said, "Hey, yeah, so you're the Hutton kid?" Yeah. He goes, "I hear you got an attitude problem." And Buttons is like 400 pounds, and Hutz looks at him. He goes, "Looks like you got a weight problem."
Jesus.
So yeah. So Hutz just really did not give a shit about
that's fucking great.
ramifications.
I love it.
And they had there was a call-in show, and I think that it might have been it was a podcast show like this, and it was out of Western Canada 10, 15 years ago. And Todd Boschel, who was one of our D guys back in the day, had called me and he said, "Hey, you have to listen to this podcast." So they're having a call-in show that says, "Who is the best guy that you've ever seen play hockey that never made the show?" And calls flooded in from all over British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. And people were going, "Oh, it's Dwayne Hutton. It's got to be Dwayne Hutton." And there were just tons of calls coming in, and guys like me had called in. I didn't call in, but Boschel had said, like, there were guys that we knew that had called in and say, "Yeah, Hutton was unbelievable." So finally, Hutton calls in and he said, "Yeah, this is Dwayne Hutton." So he said, "You know what? I tried pretty hard." He said, "I probably didn't do it the right way." And, he goes, shame on me for that. But he said, "I had such a great time playing hockey, and I had such a awesome experience with, the teammates that I met along the way and the families and friends and stuff like that." And he said, "I feel like, I've been, truly blessed, and I don't feel like, I've been a failure." He said, "I wish I probably would have done some things different and, maybe tap the brakes in a couple of areas that, that I probably should have." So he kind of acknowledged, what was going on, and, that he probably had a few missteps when you're younger, but when you're 18, you do stupid shit all the time.
Yeah, and when we get old, we realize we did a lot of stupid shit.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting to that point now.
Yeah.
You still got a ways to go.
You're just getting into that.
I know.
Elliot, if you need help, let me know, buddy. Pick up the phone.
First person I'll call. Oh, that's great.
Question for you that I was not able to find anywhere and looking up some stuff on the hockey database for you. What position did you play, Dan?
I was usually a forward, usually right wing.
Okay.
And it was I think the hockey did well. See, most of the problem with your research, Chad, is I don't think they had computers.
Yeah, Google knows everything though, but I didn't look on Google. I looked on
Yeah, I think that the reporting on a lot of those stats that you're looking at would probably be suspect at best. I think that the well-traveled leagues, I think the BC Junior League, I think the Western Hockey League, the stuff, like I spent 3 years back in Nova Scotia and then went over to England and played in a place called Blackburn in British First Division, ran around there for a while.
I was going to ask you about that one. According to what I found, you scored 116 points in 27 games.
Yeah.
That's unreal.
Yeah. It's a bit of a different situation there. Like each team was allowed 2 imports. And most of those imports were guys that had played, at least a D1 or a Western CHL type caliber. And I was lucky enough to have a guy named Fred Perlini as my other import. And Fred played some games with the Maple Leafs and was perfectly cut out for that game. I mean, those games weren't 3-2; they were 9-6 and
Mm-hmm.
10-8 type thing. It was, as we said earlier, it was all gas, no brakes, and those
Yeah.
things. Like there was not a ton of defense played in those types of games, and Freddie was the perfect line mate to have in those. I mean, if you look at the top 10 in scoring, I think you'll find that Fred was probably, I don't know, if he didn't lead it, he was probably in the top 3 or 4. But he was just a big, strong skating guy that could, make plays and shoot the puck, and that's exactly what you needed over there. So, um, lots of fun over there. The imports were leaned on a lot. I mean, we played probably 40 minutes a game,
Oh,
which
wow.
which is a lot. I mean, you might, as a forward, you might play, 15 to 18 minutes a game. And
Mm-hmm.
over there, like you would go, take a shift on defense to get a rest. And there were times where I would punch a guy in the head just to go get a penalty so I could go rest for a couple of minutes.
Wow.
And that was not uncommon amongst the imports. And sometimes, the imports would say, "Hey, okay, we're going to have a little wrestling match here and we're going to go have a rest." And it goes, "Okay, fine."
Perfect. I could
Yeah.
use 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, but England was awesome. It was, it was a great experience. We ran around places like, the Lake District in York and played golf in St. Andrews and Kings
Right.
Barnes and, places like that. And, you would go down to London and go to, the museums of natural history and
Mm-hmm.
Big Ben. You just like it was a great way to see the world and somebody else paid for it. So,
Exactly. Good for you.
yeah. And I also had some teammates from my days in Nova Scotia that were playing in the Dutch league. So I ended up going over there at Christmas time, and you run into those guys and get to see a little bit more of the world. And sometimes they'll come and see you if they have a week off, stuff like that. So very good experience for me. Hockey has taken me all over North America, England, obviously into, some of the Euro countries too. So it was, um, couldn't ask for anything better.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know your son, Jake.
Yeah.
I know him through it was, I mean, when I was 12, 13, I was like commenting on all these Spokane Chiefs YouTube videos and stuff too. And he had responded to one of my comments and we just like became buddies after that. Is he still playing anywhere?
He's not. He ended up having a hip labrum problem a couple of years ago, and he had played in the Western States Hockey League. He had also ended up at Bellingham and played for their club group as well.
Mhm.
But Jake started radiology tech school like 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
So, or
cool.
3 weeks ago, something like that. So he ended up with a kinesiology degree out of Western, and he's furthering his education right now.
Nice. Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I'll have to
But he's
shoot
still,
him a text.
yeah. So he's still, good buddies with the Yamamoto kids, Kyler
Mhm.
and Keanu. Carter Jones still playing in the
Mhm.
East Coast League, I think, for Wichita right now, and has a few other buddies that are still playing. I think Jake's 26 right now, so he's kind of got that group of friends that are that age that
Right.
there's still a few of them playing right now.
That's awesome.
But I know I saw Keanu, I saw him before he left, but he's playing for the Dundee Stars
Mhm.
over in the English, Scottish leagues too. So he said he was looking forward to that, and he's an avid golfer. So I think that he will be well served in that environment. I think uh, Ireland is just a quick, 45-minute ferry ride or wait, so you
Nice.
can get over into that area as well. So
That's
Yeah,
very cool.
good stuff.
we've seen the brothers out at Downriver a few different times. Kyler has a habit of losing his rangefinder all the time, so I give him shit about that every time I see him, and he's always telling me, "Yeah, I lost it again at this course too." So
I remember the initial incident on that,
I
Chad.
figured you probably did. I give him shit every year for it afterwards. He goes, "Yeah, I lost it circling Raven again like a month later." I
Yeah.
said, "Hey, do you ever tried one of the like GPS watch things that has that instead, and it's just on your wrist all the time?" He goes, "No, that's a really good idea." And I said, "Yeah, you should give
Yeah.
that a try."
Didn't like the Amazing Ronco, didn't they have like a clapper, like the
Clap on.
lights and stuff like that? Yeah. He
What a
needs
great
one of
idea.
those.
What a great idea.
Yeah.
Well, I have one last question for you. I think we should probably just make this a standard question anytime we get the ex Chiefs on here, Elliot. But do you have a favorite memory as a Spokane Chief?
Um, I have so many of them. I mean, I guess from a personal level, you go play in that league, and then you're trying to figure out, hey, how am I gonna fit in here? And you ended up scoring a goal in my first shift there, which
That's
was
pretty awesome.
something that added some confidence. I mean, from a I guess a funny standpoint, they don't do it anymore, but there was a win a date with the Chiefs contest. It was and I was so the place is sold out on Saturday night, and they said, "Hey, there's this fan contest going on, and one lucky fan gets to pick a date for any of the chief guys, and off you go in the limo and steak dinner and stuff like that." So they line us all up on the goal line, and I'm got my arm on the net, and I'm looking at Wakaluk, and I go, "Walk," I said, "this doesn't seem right." And he goes, "There's nothing in my contract that says I got to do this." So, so this gal comes out, and she's apparently the lucky winner and gets to pick. And she's like 350, maybe 400 pounds. And I'm going, come on. Like, I didn't really sign up for this either. And the guy pulls the name out of the hat and goes, "Number 21, Mick Dakota." And Nick was living with our family at that time. And I just started laughing my ass off and about fell on the net. And Walker's just going, "Oh boy, here we go, Mickey. It's all yours."
Oh my
So
God, that's
there was
hilarious.
some stuff that happened, in 1985 that you really can't do in, 2024 that
Yeah.
were pretty funny. I guess the other interesting thing that happened is we had a best of 9 series against Portland that year, due to some, alignments in the leagues, but that thing went 9 games, and it was
Wow.
an absolute war with Portland that we ended up losing in game 9, which was I'm not saying that's a fond memory, but it was one of those things that was just like ingrained in you, and I'll probably never forget it.
Yeah. Very memorable for sure.
I wanted to ask, how did you get involved with doing the SWX stuff, working between the benches?
Great question, Elliot. I was minding my own business at home one night, and my phone rang, and somebody said, "Hey, do you want to do color commentary uh, on the game on Saturday night?" And I said, "Do you know whose phone you just called?" I said, "I have never done this ever before in my life." And we started talking a little bit about it. And I think it was I think Dave here had called me, and I know Dave a little bit from past, interactions, and most have a good relationship with most of the Spokane's front office. But he he said, we want you to do the broadcast with Dennis Patch, and they had lost somebody, and I can't remember who it was, but they said, "Are you interested in doing that?" And I went, "Yeah, okay." So I said, I think I said, I want to talk to Patchen first. And I talked to Patchen, and Patchen says, yeah, he said, Dan, it's about two guys in a bar talking about hockey. He goes, I do the play-by-play stuff. You tell people, how it happened, why it happened. And I said, yeah, okay, I can do that. And it, Elliot, to answer your question, it's scary as hell, man. It was not something I was comfortable with. And there's everything from like the equipment to they hand you a sheet of, an 8 sheet piece of paper with all of these Excel spreadsheet, tasks, and all of them said Denny and Dan, Denny and Dan, Denny and Dan. And I'm looking at Passion, and he said, Dennis, I don't know how to do any of this shit. And he's looking at me, he goes, I got all of this, okay? Don't worry about it. You just talk about hockey. So Patchen was probably the most calming influence, and a guy that just said, hey, it's not that hard. You do it just like everything else. First time you do it's always the hardest, and then you get a little bit better, you know what to expect, stuff like that. But um lots of interesting, like my seat in between the benches is awesome right now because I get to hear all of the banter going back and
Oh
forth,
yeah.
which is like absolutely hilarious. You know Luke Toporowski has to be like one of the best, mouthpieces of all time. And like some of the stuff he comes up with is just fabulous. Like, he looks at his kid one day, he goes, "Hey, dude, how'd you get in this league? Your parents must be rich." Hey, am I still your mom's favorite player? Just
Oh, that's
all
awesome.
kinds of stuff that just comes out of his mouth that was just highly entertaining to listen to. And being down there is, for me, I like it. I think it's a little more complicated than being in the color booth, because you have player interviews, coach interviews, stuff like that. Sometimes the coaches and players aren't super happy about having to talk to you, depending on, they're getting beat, 4-0. There's some
Mhm.
really bad interviews that have happened in the past, but, there's not anything that you can do about that. But being down at ice level is lots of fun just because you're, best seat in the house type thing.
It's like you're on the bench again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I seem to remember one game, want to say it was maybe 2 years ago, where you took a stick or something down
Yeah,
there.
I got harpooned in the forehead, and I was trying to get out of the way, and I could see the play. I could see the play develop, and I go, that one is going to end up right in our lap. I know that that's going to end up. And John, my cameraman, is like not the most svelte person in the world. And Johnny's probably, he's got the big boiler on him. He's probably 250 to 270, somewhere in
Yeah.
there. I said, hey, Johnny, this one's coming right at us. And one of the Spokane guys had railroaded, I think, one of the Portland guys, and the stick had hit me like, and it was completely unintentional, but the Portland guy got knocked off balance, and he basically harpooned me like right in the middle of the forehead. And I did the rest of the broadcast with a big, piece of, goo on my forehead that I wasn't real proud of. But anyways, the Portland trainer, Richie, fixed me up and said, all right, kid, you're back in the game. Get going.
I love it. I love it. And then I remember a couple years ago you did one of the radio games with Mike Boyle too. How did that come about?
Yeah, uh, Mark Gustafson usually does a color for that, and
Yeah.
Gussy's a childhood friend of mine. I've known him since 3, 4 years old type thing. But he traveled a lot, and I used to travel a lot, and it was one of those things where he said, "Hey, Boiler could use a shotgun rider if you're interested." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I would go sit down next to Boiler and do the color, and he would do the play-by-play stuff, and off we'd go.
That's
So
awesome.
we very similar to um, the TV component. I think the radio stuff is probably a little bit more forgiving, I think, than the TV.
For sure.
Like I totally tanked a thing with an interview with Luke Zazula from the Tri-City Americans one night. I thought that we were taping this, and again, my cameraman John, he goes 3, 2, 1, go. And I screwed up Zazula's name. I called him Luke Zazala or something like that, and didn't get it right. And started interviewing him. The interview went fine after I figured out what his name was. Um, I said, John says cut, and I said, "Hey John, can we do that again?" And John started laughing at me, and he said, Dan, the really interesting thing about live TV is you only get to do it once.
Oh shit.
So I was mortified. I just kind of went, "Oh my, mom." And I also came pretty close to saying some words that are probably banned by the FCC that night. So, anyways,
Oh, that's
but yeah,
great.
there's some interesting trials and tribulations. I mean, there's some equipment failures. There's pissed off coaches, pissed off players. There's it's just kind of you feel your way around that, and at the end of the day, most of the people that you're dealing with are pretty reasonable, and they understand that if you have a job to do. And I think it's just like the refs too. The refs usually have a pretty good rapport with the players, and it's you might not like it, but usually that's the way it is, the way
Yeah,
it's going to be. So
for
move
sure.
on and let's get going. So
Right. Yeah. Are you going to be doing that stuff this year too?
yeah, I think so. The SWX stuff usually happens after the in the January through February
Yeah.
timeframe,
Right.
sometimes March, because they don't want to compete with Gonzaga basketball and
Yeah.
the college football stuff that's going on. I think that's a losing battle, but it kind of depends on what teams are involved in. Seattle, Portland, Everett, Wenatchee will make it interesting this year, depending on if they are going to do games down there. So it kind of depends, but usually there's 8 to 10 that are scheduled. And then, sometimes the playoff structure dictates, a few more.
For sure. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's good. And when those games were on TV, I would usually watch them if I wasn't able to attend. But I'm happy to go do those games just because I probably go to 15 games a year, and being able to have the best seat in the house is
Exactly.
always an added
Absolutely.
incentive for me.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, this has been great.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this, Dan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Always a pleasure chatting with you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will not see you at the golf course anytime soon, I'm sure, with the weather changing, but maybe we'll see you between the benches down there.
Yeah, you never know. You never know, Chad. I might get bored and come and see you at the golf course.